Strange, I know. It's one of those days where strangeness is going to take center stage, and I'm just embracing it wholeheartedly. I apologize in advance. It's going to get weird. But it's no weirder than anything you've experienced in your life, I guarantee you. There's this general understanding of what the word prophecy means. In the Western world, we tend to hear the word prophecy and we consider it to be a prediction about the future, right? We say someone is prophetic if they are speaking to something that is going to come true someday. You might raise your hand if you've ever been to a palm reader. Not many of us, okay, but some of us. So like palm readers, one way of understanding what they do is they try to tell you about where your life is heading, what they see in your future. But there's another way of understanding prophecy, and it's not about seeing forward as much as it's about seeing through. In the Hebrew Bible, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we would say that prophecy is not about seeing forward, it's not about predicting what will happen, as much as it's about seeing through our current moment and seeing what God is always doing underneath. What is happening beneath the surface? One way of understanding it is there are places where you might be able to see a river. A river is running wild, and then maybe it goes underground, and you can't see the water itself anymore, but it doesn't mean the river stopped existing. It just means that you have to change what you're looking for. So maybe you start looking for trees that grow a particular way. You hear what I'm saying? So prophetic vision is a matter of seeing through the way things look and seeing what really is, what's really there. And it's a practice that is essential to our survival. As individuals, as community, as a church, we have to have people among us. It's not a gift that we will all have, but we have to have people among us who are able to see through the way things look and envision things the way they really are. And when we do that, we start naming how strange life can be. And we have not just worship to help us prepare for the strangeness of life. We also have a Bible that is filled with very strange stories. We have a faith tradition that gives us practices, ways of being in the world that prepare us for strange times. And so we offer one of those stories to you this morning. There was a man named Naaman. And Naaman was a mighty warrior in King Aram's army. That was in Syria. So right off the bat, you know this is a strange story. We are telling stories from the Jewish Christian Bible. This is a story about a man who is the enemy of Israel. He is one of the major warriors who conquers a lot of Israel. He storms their towns and raids their villages. He captured some of their people and took them home to be slaves and servants for his wife and for others. Naaman is powerful, and he has risen in the ranks of the king's army. He is honored and revered. He is respected as this amazing, powerful civilian. He's the epitome of what all Syrian men would want to be. Until one day when he contracts a disease, and his life turns weird overnight. It all gets very strange. Now, it starts with the name of the disease. It is called Sarat. Ooh. Ever heard of it? Yeah. You, what? We've heard of it. Okay, good. So in a lot of our Bibles, that's translated as leprosy. But it doesn't actually mean leprosy. It means it's a skin condition, it's a disease that makes the person who has it look hideous. It's really disgusting to look at. And so Naaman contracts this disease, and overnight he goes from being someone who is honored and revered in his community to someone who is avoided at all costs. People don't even want to look directly at him. He's so hideous to look at. And everyone's convinced that whatever he has might spread to them. There were actually a lot of beliefs about this in the ancient world. If anyone contracted an illness that was seen as particularly debilitating or ugly, that was seen as a punishment from the gods for something you've done wrong. So overnight, Naaman goes from conquering hero, established warrior, privileged person among the entire army to being somebody who is avoided, who is not looked at, and who is now suspect of doing terrible things. It looks like he has committed a lot of sins, and God is punishing him accordingly. So his Jewish handmaiden, who he had stolen and given to his wife, she sees his skin condition. She sees this sarat, this illness on his skin. And she says, I know what that is, and I know what you need to do about it. My people have rituals for dealing with this. You need to go see a prophet of God, of the Lord my God, the people of Israel, and have the prophet heal you. So Naaman considers this, and he has heard of no other people who are able to heal him. So he goes to the king and gets permission to go back to Israel to go seek some powerful spiritual healer. The king grants him permission, probably like this: good, fine, get out of here. Just don't ever come in front of me ever again. I never want to see this hideous blemish on your skin, ever. So he goes away, and he takes with him a cart full of treasure, of silver and gold, to give to whoever might be able to cure him. And he goes in search of the prophet Elisha. And Elisha is gifted with prophetic vision, which means without even laying eyes on him, Elisha never sees Naaman. He sends a note. And in the note, he tells Naaman exactly what he needs to do in order to be cured. He says, go bathe in the river Jordan 7 times, and you will be restored to health. So Naaman gets this news and becomes furious. He becomes outraged, incensed. He says, the nerve of this supposed prophet, this magician. He was supposed to call upon his God and have God come down and touch me and restore me to greatness. That's what was supposed to happen. Now he's telling me to go bathe in the Jordan River? The Jordan is disgusting. We have much better water back in Syria. If I was going to bathe and be repaired, be restored, I would have done it back home where the water is nice. I wouldn't let my horse drink from the Jordan River. I'm not embellishing. This is how he thought. It's disgusting. You offend me, sir, he says, shaking his fist. We can make this as melodramatic as you want. He goes out of his mind. And then his servants who are at this point the only people willing to still talk to him, they turn to Naaman and they say, Master, if you had been if you had been told to do something difficult in order to be healed, wouldn't you have done it? And Naaman says, yes, by Jove, I would have gone out and slayed 1,000 men. I would have climbed the highest mountain. You have no idea the lengths I would go to heal this illness. And they said, well, isn't it better news that all you have to do is go down in the river and wash? To be restored simply by washing? Isn't that good news? And so Naaman becomes humbled, he becomes convinced, and he goes down to the river Jordan and he puts his finger in the water and it grosses him out, and he washes once, and then he gets a little bit extra the next time, washes again, then he becomes more comfortable, washes again, and again, and again, and again, and again, until his illness is gone and he is restored. Now here's the important thing about healing stories in the Bible. It's not just about the body being made well. That's not what these stories are actually about. That happens, but the more important thing that happens is as Naaman's illness is washed away, he is not just restored to health, he is restored to his life. He's able to be gathered back into society. His relationships become repaired. He's no longer isolated. He is now enveloped in the safety of community. That's what this Hebrew word for cure or healing, that's the connotation. It means to gather back, to reconcile, to restore, not just in terms of your own bodily health, but in terms of your spirit and your community, to be made whole once more. Worship, church, the Bible, faith practices, these are all things that we have that prepare us for the strangeness of life. Are you aware of how strange life can get? Naaman was a celebrated war hero who lost everything virtually overnight. And his only way to be restored was to bathe 7 times in the disgusting water of his hated enemies. His entire life was built up on being the most powerful, the most respected, the most admired. But then something strange happened. He got sick, and the only path available to him to be restored was to go do something disgusting, something that seemed so beneath him, so vile. The only way forward for him was to practice something he detested in order to be made well. Now, our church has gone through a similar journey. When this church was first built, when it was first established, there was a very specific belief in the culture. And it went like this: if you are a good Christian, nothing bad will happen to you. That was the popular theology. 300 years ago, that was the idea. If you want nothing bad to ever happen to you, you need to spend your Sundays in church. And the reason why you would maybe dole out some money for a nice box pew like this is because church could last for 3 to 4 hours. You're welcome. We're going to be here maybe another 20 minutes. But you wanted to be comfortable because you were going to be here a really long time. And if you didn't have the luxury of paying for your own pew and sitting up front where everyone could admire you and see you, then you would stand in the back or struggle for like a little section of a bench in order to sit. The idea was that if you worship on Sunday, you come here when you're supposed to, and then you spend the other 6 days of the week living an exemplary Christian life, really demonstrating to the community how good you are, how brave and valiant you are, how proud you are of your good family and your wonderful inheritance. By demonstrating this kind of exemplary citizenship the other 6 days a week, you became someone who was revered by your neighborhood, someone who is totally respected, and someone who we assume nothing bad ever happened to you. And that's where church life began in America. It began as a way of bolstering citizens to maintain a certain code of ethical behavior throughout the week so that you could say God is protecting you and blessing you, and the bad people who are failing to do this, they don't deserve to have good things. That's where we started. That's where our church history comes from in this country. But over the last 300 years, something strange has happened. We suddenly know that that's not the way things are. Living a morally upright life is good, and there are many benefits of it, but it doesn't prevent you from having bad things happen to you. We know that now. We didn't know that then. Our church is being asked to make the same shift that Naaman was asked to make. Naaman spent his entire life being the epitome of what you would want a Syrian man to be. And it served him for a time. It led him to fame and to glory and to wealth. And then when something strange in his life happened, it all got taken away. And he had to find this other path to restoration, which involved going somewhere he did not want to go and doing things he did not want to do. Friends, the same is true for our church community. Life is more strange now. Life is weird. And our church culture is changing, whether we want it to or not. It's no longer seen as the epitome of what a good person does, to go to church on Sunday mornings. That's not why we gather. That's not necessarily why you're here. What this story teaches us is that there comes a point in life where things get strange. Things get different than they were before. And it's up to those of us with prophetic vision who can see things for what they really are to help lead the way for what happens next. Your church council has been gathering since August at least, and they've been gathering every month to talk about their vision for where this church is going, for what God might be calling us to do in this particular moment. For the last several months, they've been asking two big questions. The first is, where is God calling us to go? And the second is, how is God calling us to get there? And today, when we have our next church council meeting right after this service, they will be hopefully zoning in on a particular way of articulating that. Here's who God calls us to be. Here's where God calls us to go, and here's how we're going to get there. We're going to articulate that later today. But what I can share with you right now is that every single iteration, every single idea, every single vision that has popped up in this conversation, it has all had to do with restoring people to life. Every idea we've had, every single vision we've seen, every single time we've named what this church is and what it does best, we've named that we practice restoring people to life. Not restoring people to health in their body, but restoring people to the whole life that God has waiting for us. Gathering us back together, gathering us back to ourselves, reconciling us with one another, restoring us to the full eternal life that God has waiting for us, not when we die, but now, today, on this earth as it is in heaven. And it's been amazing to sit back and hear the visions and hear the potential for where this church is going and what we might be doing. And it occurs to me that all we're really doing is telling the most important stories of who this church has been. We can look through literally 300 years of historical records to see all the big stuff we've done and the big things about who this church has been. We can look at when buildings were expanded and when major projects were undertaken and when a huge youth group and a Sunday school were over there in the other building. We can talk about these plentiful times and these huge missions. We can talk about the 100 years worth of Christmas fairs where we have raised untold amounts of money to give away to other people. These are all amazing parts of our heritage. They need to be celebrated. But the stories that I hear more often around this church have nothing to do with all that. They have to do with how individual people work to restoring life with and for one another. And I'd like to very briefly tell you one of those stories. Years ago, there was a member of this church who lost a child. And the sadness, the grief, the despair over this child's death nearly consumed this church member. She couldn't function. She couldn't live her life. And there was a member of the church, a good friend of hers, who one day got up the courage to go over and do something that she did not want to do. She showed up at this person's door and she said, "You know I love you. You know I know how hard this is, how sad it must be to lose a child. But you have other kids to raise and you have other responsibilities. You need to snap out of it." That was that conversation. Several years later, this friend lost a child of her own. And when grief threatened to overcome her, she once again went to this friend's house and had a conversation that she did not want to have. And this time when she showed up at her friend's door, she said, "Can you ever possibly forgive me? I had no business telling you how to deal with the grief in losing your child. Now that I've lost one of my own, I am so sorry. Can you ever forgive me for judging you?" And those two were very good friends and faithful servants of this church for the rest of their lives. We're all like Naaman. We're all proud people, and we don't like having our illness seen in public. We're all people who want to hide the strangeness of our lives. None of us are comfortable being totally vulnerable and transparent with one another, even those of us who have known each other for years. And yet, that is exactly the kind of practice that has held this church together for 300 years. For being willing to say, here's the strangeness of my life, tell me about the strangeness of yours. Here's what I struggle with, share with me what you struggle with. we have these deep-seated fears that if we find out too much about somebody else's life, your grief will overcome me. And I have a fear that if I share with you what I'm struggling with, you might judge me as weak or lazy or not up to the task. But God calls us down this path of restoration. God calls us to get down into the murky waters that we'd rather not touch, to be exposed to stuff that seems dank and horrible, but in the end is the only thing that can restore us, restore our own health, restore our joy, restore our souls, and most importantly, restore our sanity. It's only by sharing how crazy we all are that we have a hope of not being crazy anymore. I don't know why that's true, it just seems to be. So we need people among us who are able to see with prophetic clarity that path forward that takes us to places that we may not feel like going, to make us dirty and complicated in ways we may not feel comfortable going, but knowing that that is exactly the path that we have to take to restore our own lives and restore life to our wider community. Are we up to the task?